Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and welcome to my primer for new folks trying to get into Star Trek or curious about Star Trek. This is a beginner's guide to Star Trek, how to start Trek, at least from my perspective. This is entirely my idea, planned out from scratch with my history and sensibilities with this franchise. Welcome everybody, thanks a lot for being here. Starting kind of late on a Wednesday night. I'm not planning on going more than an hour tonight, but I am going to do this as a kind of laid back stream. I thought about scripting this, and I actually started writing a video for this a few months ago, and I just haven't had the time to sit down and get a script out. So I decided I'll go ahead and broadcast like I have been with everything else lately, and I'll try to make this as concise and not horribly long-winded as possible, at least with the episode layout. So let me kind of break down what I'm doing with this, and then I'll get into the specific episodes a little bit later that I think are good for newcomers to start with for Star Trek. Once again, welcome if you're watching live. Thanks for watching after the fact. I'm hoping some people who have never seen Star Trek or have seen very little Star Trek actually take a look at this video. But this might also be a cool thing for people that, for Trekkies, Trekkers, whatever you want to call yourself, that are trying to get new folks into the franchise, to take a look at, to help them give people advice. And I'm hoping that this will be a really easy way to ease people into Star Trek. Part of the reason I wanted to do this is because I'm asked all the time. This is like a really popular question on the Captain Logan Show. I'm not really into Star Trek. How do I get into it? Where should I start? And there are a lot of different answers to that question, because because there's a lot of Star Trek, right? So some of it depends on your own personal sensibilities and the kind of television that you like to watch. So I can really easily point to the one episode that I think is the easiest introduction to the show, that tends to get people excited about it and grabs them and makes them feel like maybe there's not the giant barrier to entry that they thought there was, that maybe it's not too boring and cerebral, and it might actually be enjoyable and not feel like homework, even if at the same time it might be a little bit thought-provoking for them. And that is the two-part season cliffhanger at the end of Season 3, Next Generation, called The Best of Both Worlds. And for whatever reason, that seems to be a really great first episode for people. It's one of the most popular episodes of that show. It's at the top of a lot of people's lists of very best TNG episodes. And if I was going to tell you to watch one episode that might make you want to keep looking at Star Trek, that would be the one. But TNG, Star Trek The Next Generation, is, I'm going to be careful with my acronyms tonight, is not necessarily going to be everybody's cup of tea or everybody's best starting place. So what I want to do is break down all of what I think of now as kind of the original 5 series, which is such a weird way to think about it. But the series before Abrams Trek, before Star Trek 09, and before New Trek, I'll break down the premises for each of those shows before I get to the list of episodes. Now, the list is in the description, and so if you don't want to hear me talk about any of this stuff, and you just want to kind of take my word for it, I'll be the opposite of LeVar Burton. I think you can take my word for it. And you want to just start from the original series and watch the episodes that I'm suggesting that would give you a good crash course for Star Trek. Don't feel the need to look at any more of this video until maybe after you've watched some stuff. But if you want me to just kind of help ease you into it and hold your hand just a little bit, and also just for Star Trek fans that might be curious as to why I made the selections I made, continue watching this video, and I'll be chatting again for probably about an hour tonight. There are, before you get to New Trek, about 700 episodes of Star Trek. There's a lot of it, and now if you want to count all of New Trek, we're probably upwards to 900, I'm sorry, what did I say, 7? Yeah, to 900 or to 1,000. I don't really know how many episodes have been produced since 2017. I've not kept up that hard, and I haven't seen everything because I have made no bones about the fact that I have not been the biggest fan of the direction the franchise has gone. I have a hard time, seeing a lot of it as actually canonical. It's not all absolutely horrible. It just, a lot of it doesn't look like Star Trek to me, and a lot of it is actually really pretty bad. Like, I would enjoy it more if it just wasn't Star Trek but was great science fiction. I don't think there's a ton of that either, but I will speak a little bit to even the New Trek series, from what I've seen anyway, that I think wouldn't be the worst place to, if not full-on start. Like, I don't think anybody should just start with Discovery or even Strange New Worlds or Picard or any of that stuff, and that's not just because, but I'll tell you which of those things, if you're gonna do any of it kind of early, might kind of make sense. So I'll get to that place. But it's not just about quality. It's also about, again, just barrier to entry. A lot of those shows are very kind of member-berry, where they weirdly feel like shows that are made for Star Trek fans but don't entirely really, appreciate or understand Star Trek, at least from where I'm sitting. So, like, the animated series Lower Decks would be odd for somebody to start with, because it is so much about, do you remember this thing that happened in this Star Trek episode? And if you really like, modern, animated comedies, you might find some of that stuff funny, even if you don't, understand the references. But it's so much about the references, I don't know. So anyway, but let me go all the way to the beginning. So one of the big reasons that I get from people all the time for why they've not really looked at Star Trek very much, beyond just, I'm not really into space opera, or I'm not a big sci-fi person, or I don't really like things set in space, or it looks boring. I hear that a lot. Is there's so much of it, I don't know where to start. I don't understand how the shows talk to each other. I don't know what order I have to look at things in, and I don't even know if they all are in the same continuity. At this point, it all ostensibly is, even if you don't really buy some of the newer stuff, like feeling like it's in the same world. It's all supposed to be canonical now in the air quotes Prime universe, except for the J.J. Abrams movies, starting with Star Trek 09. So we have 3 movies that are set in a totally different timeline when we soft rebooted in 09. And then we went back to the original continuity again, ostensibly with Discovery and, almost said Beyond, but that's the name of a movie, so I don't want to confuse anybody, but Discovery and everything that came after it. So each of the main series that I'm going to talk about today, so TOS through Voyager and then Enterprise, are all very much standalone series, but some of them cross into each other some and happen more around the same time. So every one of the series that I'm going to be talking about more tonight are shows that you could watch absolutely in a vacuum. And so I wanted to give everybody a sense of what the flavor of each show is, because depending on your own sensibilities, you might gravitate toward one more than the others. So you can either take my primer and try everything, I would suggest, in production order as opposed to chronological order. Each show I put in somewhere between 5 and 9 episodes. I had a hard time paring down TOS, so there's quite a bit of, there's like 8 or 9 episodes of TOS, but, which is, the original series, and but if any of these sound more interesting to you than the others, I would say you can begin with any of these and watch them in a vacuum, absolutely. Now I will say, to my eye, there is not a great first season of Star Trek except for the original series. So when you get into the Next Generation and after, it's, with the exception of Enterprise, I guess, it is kind of better to start a little bit later. But if any of these premises sound interesting, feel free to just start with that show. And if it's not grabbing you, I've got that list of episodes that might be like more indicative of what the show will be like overall, so you could jump to those. Especially with the first season of Next Generation, because when you get later in that show, it feels like a very different show. So, the original series, which everybody should be familiar with at least the concept and a couple of the principal characters, I would imagine. But I mean, I'm going to treat this like a kindergarten class. I mean, this is, Star Trek for absolute beginners. So you have Star Trek, the original series, and that is the original 5-year mission. It's set in the 23rd century. It's a series that's made in the 60s, starting in 1966. It stars William Shatner as Captain Kirk. And you have 3 main characters that really carry the show through. You have the triad of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And each week is usually an adventure of exploration. So you have a ship and crew that go on dangerous missions, just trying to see what is out there, exploring new life and new civilizations. We all know this, of course. It's bright, it's colorful, but there is an edge to it. Very often, certainly. A lot of morality plays, a lot of ethical conundrums, and that's the big thing that kind of connects all of Star Trek thematically, is that it's not just the idea of hopefulness and optimism that you'll hear a lot of people throwing around, like Star Trek is about a hopeful future. That's absolutely what it is, but we don't want to get too religious about it either. Star Trek is also a fun entertainment when it's at its best, and when it's not superficial about it, it's not just the future can be hopeful. It's about our trying to better ourselves, and whether our species can actually become overall more enlightened than we are today. Is a utopia possible, or something like that? Can we get to a point where we're not about just ourselves and accumulating things, but about bettering everything, or bettering all of us, excuse me. If I personally do better, it makes everybody better. That's what the quote unquote philosophy of Star Trek is all about. So the original series is certainly will certainly look kitschy to a modern eye, but if you have seen any other 60s television and you enjoy that period, I would suggest starting with the original series. I think some of the best science fiction ideas are there, and it's also just a good history lesson in getting a sense of the way Star Trek permeates the culture. So one of the reasons you might want to try to get into Star Trek at least a little bit is to figure out what people are talking about when they reference it and quote it. And I have a hard time not quoting or referencing Star Trek in nearly every video I make, because there is, again, so much of it, and it touches on everything, and it's a really easy baseline for me to communicate in general. And I think if you look at especially the original series and then maybe some Next Generation, you'll just start noticing a lot of things in the culture where it affects things that you didn't really get or appreciate before. The Next Generation starts in 1987. It's on for 7 years. So the original series is on for 3 years and gets canceled prematurely, and then gets really popular in reruns, which is why movies get made and why ultimately The Next Generation gets made. And I'll talk about movies a little bit later when I go into my episode primer. The Next Generation is it has kind of a rough start ultimately, but it gets a lot more confident and smarter and more fun, and there are a lot of really classic, thought-provoking episodes. Of course, it stars Patrick Stewart as Captain Picard, and the most popular character in the show, besides Picard, is probably Data, and for similar reasons, is Spock to the original series. I don't want to break down every character and get into all of the ideas with these shows, but the Next Generation is basically the original series concept again, except it does get a little, I don't want to say more archy or more serialized, but there's a lot more of an involved like continuity and lore, and you certainly get like recurring species and things in the original series, but you get a lot of like the Klingons, like the Romulans, but you start to get a lot of sequels and follow-up episodes, and then kind of threads where we keep touching back on things like a potential Klingon civil war, and like the Borg, and a potential invasion on the horizon, that kind of thing. So if the original just exploring the universe idea for Star Trek is interesting to you, but you like a show that's a little bit more involved and kind of develops its characters a little bit more, The Next Generation is certainly the place for you. And then when you get into Deep Space Nine, and by the way, I didn't do this on purpose, but it turns out that today, I knew we were into a big anniversary this year for Deep Space Nine, but it is the 30th anniversary of the series, I think, right? And today is it marks the day that Deep Space Nine first aired, and I always forget that it started in January. But anyway, I didn't do that on purpose. But it's pretty crazy that it worked out that way. So anyway, and I'm planning on doing some Deep Space Nine content this year. Brandon and Adam and I are talking about bringing back Star Trek Club on a once or twice a month basis if we can make it work out, and we're hoping to go through the Dominion War arc specifically. In chronological order, if we're able to make that work. Deep Space Nine is the darkest of the 5 Star Trek series before you get to New Trek, and it gets certainly a lot darker after that, but with Discovery and with Picard. But Deep Space Nine is a very serialized show that is more like a Western in space. So instead of what Roddenberry always called Wagon Train to the Stars, it is much more like Bonanza or something, where you're in a singular town, being a space station in this case. Not that we never go anywhere, because we certainly do, particularly a little bit later in the series, but it is... like I said, more serialized. It's more of a singular story told over a lot of episodes, even though there are certainly one-off episodes, and a lot of that early on, but as it continues, it gets more archy, it gets more involved, but you still have a lot of really great standalone episodes. It's all about the politics of a space station in the middle of a volatile region of space that right after one planet is no longer occupying another, with the Cardassians and the Bajorans, and you've got the Federation coming in to try to mitigate, and a new commander who will later on be a captain, Ian Sisko, who takes over the space station and doesn't really want to be there, but is trying to find a way to keep the peace. It has a lot of religious themes. It has a lot of really interesting political themes. It stays true to the spirit of Star Trek while challenging all of its ideals, and in some ways, it is the best and smartest Star Trek show. The Next Generation is my favorite show. I have so much respect for Deep Space Nine and what the showrunners with Moore and those guys accomplished with that series. I think it is, storytelling wise, technically the best Star Trek show to this day, and it is really impressive, the size of the cast, with a lot of recurring characters that keep coming in and out even beyond the principal cast. and it does a lot for the world building of the universe at large, certainly as well. But it has the characters that most change and grow throughout the series, and so if something more, binge worthy is to your taste, and if you want something that seems a little bit less flowery, which you might kind of see TNG as, particularly early on, the Next Generation, you might want to take a look at Deep Space Nine. And I think Deep Space Nine is probably the show that best holds together in a vacuum. There are a lot of Deep Space Nine fans that don't really care that much about the rest of Star Trek, and that was certainly the case back at the time. So you had some outliers at the time that really liked the edginess of Deep Space Nine and didn't care about the rest of it. And there was a little bit of divide in the fan base, where you had some old school Star Trek fans that said, this is a bridge too far, it's too dark, it's too much against the principles of Star Trek. Humanity would not have the problems that we have during the show. I don't agree with any of that. I think it's handled extremely maturely, and is the show that I wish Discovery was looking at in Picard to harder in trying to do more serialized, darker Star Trek. It doesn't get to the cynical, in my opinion anyway, the cynical and kind of dystopian looking place that those shows sometimes wind up at. And I don't mean to just spend this whole time throwing shade at New Trek, but it's just easy to make that comparison, where it's like this is dark Star Trek in my opinion, done right. And there's also plenty of levity and comedy in Deep Space Nine. Then you get to Voyager, which I should mention, by the way, that Deep Space Nine begins during the Next Generation, during TNG's 6th season, and Voyager starts right after the Next Generation has ended, because the studio wanted another show that was more like the premise of the original series. We need a ship flying through space exploring stuff. It can't just be a space station, and Deep Space Nine wasn't as popular as they were hoping it would be. So Voyager begins a few seasons into Deep Space Nine, and right after the Next Generation ends, and it is basically Lost in Space with Star Trek. So you have DS9 gives us our first series Black Captain. I have to say series because we had Black Captains, and we'd also had female captains before that, but they hadn't heralded their own series yet, or helmed their own series, I should say. Janeway is our first female captain running a show, and you had, I'm going to start getting into character names that you guys aren't going to know, so I'm not going to do that. But anyway, so the premise here is Voyager gets hurtled 70,000 light years into outside of the Federation space, which is the Alpha Quadrant. They wind up in the Delta Quadrant, which we had seen before in the Next Generation, and we know that the Borg are in that region of space, so we will eventually meet them, and they'll become a big bad for this series. And Janeway makes a choice, a moral choice that strands her and her crew there, and spends the next 7 years trying to get home. Beloved characters in this show include the holographic Doctor, who is like Data in that he's an artificial life form, but because he's a hologram, he is capable of emotion, and he's a wonderful like comic relief kind of character. Of course, 7 of 9 is a beloved character who doesn't come in until later. And she's not even in this list, but here she is up here. That's hilarious. This is StarTrek.com, by the way. And I haven't looked at this website in a long time. It's laid out entirely differently than the last time I looked at it. But I don't know. I like this layout. It looks all right. But anyway, 709 is a former Borg, and is liberated from the collective and is trying to find her humanity. that's a common theme all the way through Star Trek is artificial characters or characters for whom emotion is foreign, trying to discover their humanity, and we learn more about ourselves and about human nature through these characters that don't think they're human than we do even through the human characters. They tend to end up being the most human characters, like Spock, like Data, like Seven of Nine, like even the Doctor. And it is a sillier series much of the time than Deep Space Nine and TNG, although TNG definitely has its sillier moments and sillier episodes. Absolutely, but people will complain that Voyager gets kind of wacky with and sloppy with its science. So if you want harder science fiction for your Star Trek, Voyager might not be the place to start. If you want something a little bit more casual and with a really fun cast of characters, Voyager is a great place to go. Although people did find the characters kind of wooden and hollow early on. So sort of like TNG, I think it finds itself a lot more by the third season, and especially the fourth season. And I would recommend, if you want to start Voyager, maybe starting with the third or fourth season, just like I would also recommend with the Next Generation. And finally, you have Enterprise, and I'm going to put Enterprise squarely in the optional camp. So Enterprise is a really, really flawed series. I mean, Voyager kind of is too, for a lot of reasons I won't get into tonight. But Enterprise is a prequel that already had the new Trek problem for me to a lesser degree, in that it definitely feels like Star Trek in a lot of its storytelling, but it has a lot of kind of canonical issues. It feels very retcon-y, with a lot of things starting right away. It feels like a sequel that takes place in the past because of some time travel shenanigans, and then ultimately when you get to especially the fourth season of the show, we kind of abandon that whole idea and just make it a straight-up original series prequel. So it is kind of back to formula for Star Trek in a way, where we're just going out in a ship called the Enterprise, exploring again, but now it's pre the Federation. So the Federation is, of course, a conglomeration of planets that all get together to help each other and better themselves. And Starfleet is, so there is a difference between Starfleet and the Federation. Starfleet is Earth's organization that sends ships out into space to explore and to make alliances with other species, right? And so Starfleet exists in this world. This takes place in the 22nd century. I didn't break this down earlier, but again, original series 23rd century, The Next Generation 24th century, all the way through Voyager. And so those shows take place within the span of like 20 years, and 20, and they cross in and out a lot more than any of the other shows because they all take place in about the same time period. And then Enterprise, even though in my mind, tonally, it kind of feels like a sequel to Voyager, which is one of the reasons I would say don't start with it, even though it chronologically takes place earlier. Hopefully everybody can follow this. Enterprise it takes place again in the 22nd century. So you have Starfleet, you don't have the Federation yet. It's the early days of space exploration, and it begins with Captain Jonathan Archer, really wet behind the ears, going out with the first Enterprise that is retconned. Originally Kirk's Enterprise, which starts as Pike's Enterprise, for those of you in the know, is just going out to explore, but he has to take a Vulcan liaison with him who he kind of butts heads with. So there's a lot more kind of interpersonal conflict in this show than you had with The Next Generation and even Voyager. But you have plenty of that on Deep Space Nine because of the nature of that show and all the races that don't have anything to do with Starfleet that are there. Enterprise is a really, really mixed bag, but you may appreciate the more relatively modern sensibilities of it. It starts in the early 2000s. It does get a lot arcier like DS9. Like, I would consider Enterprise kind of a mix, tonally and also approach-wise, of the Next Generation, or sorry, I should say of Voyager and of Deep Space Nine. It has some really fun, colorful characters that are never explored enough, developed enough for my taste. But Dr. Phlox is one of the coolest characters, I think, in Star Trek. Archer is not my favorite captain. I think he's not a lot of people's favorite captain, but he's Scott Bakula, and Bakula's great, but I don't know. I don't want to just sit here and bag on Enterprise, but I don't think it's a great place to start. However, I will say I have known people that love Enterprise in the same way that some people love Deep Space Nine, that never bother with the rest of Star Trek at all. And so if you try it out, you might find yourself in that camp for your own personal sensibilities. The more kind of cramped nature of the ship, feeling more like a submarine, is really appealing to a lot of people, and I love the look and feel of that ship, and the way the graphics are handled with monitors and things. Like, it's a really cool look, and I think it's looking a lot at like what Nicholas Meyer did with Wrath of Khan and stuff. But yeah, Trip Tucker is a character that people love. He's kind of our first, real Southern character in a main cast past Dr. McCoy, but he has but he's not crotchety like that. It's a real different flavor. But anyway, so there's a breakdown of series, and then when you get into New Trek, again, I'm not going to talk too much about those shows because I've not seen them all, and I have a tough time seeing them as part of this canon. But I will say, if your entry point for Star Trek originally was the Abrams movies, with Star Trek '09, Strange New Worlds would not be the worst place to go to, at least after you've seen a little bit of the original series. I wouldn't start with it, and I know some like big Star Trek fans watching will kind of boo me for even suggesting this. And I don't know, it's a really divided fan base these days, unfortunately. It's sad to say. I was very happy with that show at the start because it really felt like Star Trek again, and I wasn't real high on the second season, but I still like it better, at least as being, supposedly canonical Star Trek, and just stories I can follow that make sense, that actually have some sci-fi ideas, than the rest of New Trek. And it's a little bit lighter, and it doesn't feel like a dystopia anymore. It's weird because it's a spin-off of Discovery, and it doesn't feel to me at all like that world. But it stars Anson Mount as Christopher Pike. He's a really great Pike. I wish he got more to do in that show. It feels like all he ever does is stand around in his quarters cooking, which is hilarious. But I like that cast a lot, and it might be an okay entry point, again, at least after you've seen a little bit of the original series. By the way, I'll also say, when you watch the original series and also The Next Generation, I would recommend the remasters, particularly if you have a hard time taking decades earlier, like cheapness in your television seriously. If you have a hard time with the kind of fake ship models and cardboard and all of that, it might be a little bit easier for you to get into Star Trek through the remasters. And I wouldn't be saying that if they weren't handled as faithfully as they are, and as thoughtfully as they are, but they really do look quite good. And the Next Generation remasters, there's not very many effects that are even like full on redone. They're just enhanced a little bit with some CGI. There's entirely new CG space shots and things in the original series, and that's the way that it's typically streamed. So if you're just streaming these shows, these days the main place to do that is Paramount Plus, which is unfortunate because it's not a very good streaming service. It doesn't work great with certain devices. It breaks down on me all the time with Fire Stick, which is unfortunate, but it does okay on browsers. So I would suggest looking at it that way. But regardless of how you end up watching it, well, I was just going to say, the remasters are the easiest way to get your hands on it if you're just streaming. You can buy it either way, and if you end up liking original series well enough to buy it on disc, I would recommend the box set that has, and it's really neat that they made this, that has both the originals and the remasters, and I'm glad that the originals are still, really easy to get your hands on, and we didn't George Lucas that whole thing. They've not been wiped out. You can still go look at them, and if you have a favorite episode that you get to with the remaster, maybe go back and see what it looked like originally. Let me see what some folks are saying in the comments here real quick, and then I'm going to go through my episode breakdown of what I would suggest you look at for each series. And again, don't listen to that if you don't want anything spoiled. I won't give away major spoilers or anything, but it might be fun to just watch them based on my recommendation and not even know what you're getting yourself into. But I also want to talk about the individual episodes just real briefly for Star Trek fans that might want to use this to introduce other people into Star Trek. YouTube is trying to censor me. That is a hilarious handle and not one that I recognize, but welcome. Thanks for watching. He says, thank you for this. I'm so bummed out by what Disney is doing with Marvel and Star Wars and what Warner Brothers is doing with DC. I need a break from all that. I like the original 5 Trek shows, and I've been revisiting them. That's really cool. Thanks a lot for the comment. Yeah, this might be a neat time to get into Star Trek if you've been just kind of disenfranchised with what some of your favorite franchises are doing lately. I just said franchise twice in the same sentence. And, feel free to explore some new Trek and see if maybe you like some of it better than I do. But like I said, with the newer shows, I would not get to Discovery until you've, spent some time with Star Trek, and see if that's your bag at all. It would be a really weird place to start, certainly. And like I said, it feels like a different thing. It feels kind of dystopian to me, and it flounders a lot where it just can't decide exactly what it is. And it attempts to embrace, more of a Star Trek sensibility as it goes along. I just don't think it's ever great at that. But I've not watched past the 3rd season, so at some point maybe I'll finally do that. And then Picard is just kind of bad in my mind, but after you've seen some TNG and particularly the movies, you might want to check it out. People seem to love the 3rd season. I have not been able to finish it. I've not been happy with it at all. But at some point I'll finish that, and maybe at some point I'll talk about it here on the channel. But anyway, don't hold your breath on that. But because I just have not been able to get into it. But anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and go through my episode breakdown now, and we'll start with the original series and go from, again, production order. With that, we begin with the Menagerie, and like I said, the list of episodes is in the description. I didn't break this down by season, and I should have, so after the show, I'll go in, hopefully I can remember to do this, and put in the season numbers so that this is easier to find. And actually, before I get into this, let me just briefly explain kind of why I picked what I picked here. What I wanted to do is give you a good, if you've never seen very much of Star Trek, I wanted you to get a good sense of the flavor of each series, in overall understanding of the kind of big stuff in the lore and the mythology, just a sense of what the world is like and how some of these shows talk to each other. So after you've watched the 30 plus episodes and the like 4 movies that I put here, you should be able to go watch really any of Star Trek and have a pretty good baseline for just how the universe works, what the whole thing is about, thematically, but also just like the basic status quo generally. of 23rd century, then 24th century Star Trek, and even Enterprise if you decide to watch any of that, but also a sense of the diversity of tones and flavors of episodes. So I threw in some darker stuff, some lighter stuff, some more dramatic stuff, some more comedic stuff, and hopefully it'll just be, even if this is all you ever watch, it'll just be kind of a fun, watch all by itself. So anyway, with the original series, I started with the only two-parter in that show. And also, sorry, I also meant to say, I intentionally picked some episodes that will kind of set up other things for other series that I put in, so that these will, pardon me, so that, excuse me, as you're going through, you'll start recognizing things that you've seen before, and I didn't want to put in like the absolute best episodes of every show. So like there are a couple of huge like top 10, top 5 episodes in here, but I wanted you to get to be surprised by some of the best stuff, and there were whole sections of the lore that I could have introduced and then had go through this primer, right? So like I didn't do a bunch of Mirror Universe episodes. I did put Mirror Mirror in for the original series just because it's a classic and it's a lot of fun to watch, but like I could have introduced you to Mirror Universe and kept throwing that in. I didn't do that, but I did do that with some other things. So anyway, I try to do at least one two-parter from every show, because you get to live in one story for a little bit longer, which hopefully will give you just, again, a better sense of character dynamics and the world. And so I start with the Menagerie, partly because it's a Spock-centered episode, and I didn't put a lot of other Spock stuff in here, and or just like specifically Spock stuff. If you watched the Abrams movies or any new Trek, you'll be familiar with Captain Pike, who does not appear in very much canonical Star Trek before 2009, and you might be kind of confused as to where he is and what's going on with him. So I didn't want to start with the original pilot because it looks so different from the rest of the show, but the Menagerie uses footage from that pilot, which is called The Cage, as flashbacks, and so it'll give you a sense of the history of where the show started and where it is already into the actual true first season, and it's also just a really wonderful story. And then again, I don't want to review these things or tell you too much about what they're about. But I guess I'll just say real quick with Menagerie, it's about a person's like loyalty to the rules versus to their friends, I guess is what that's about. Balance of Terror is has very much the structure with kind of the cat and mouse game that Wrath of Khan has, and is a really good setup for what that movie is doing and what Star Trek kind of can't get away from. With villains after that, it's a wonderful performance from Mark Leonard as the first Romulan that we get in Star Trek, and I did want to introduce newcomers to that species because they show up all the time, and there's also a lot of really great one-off episodes about Romulans that you don't need to have seen any other Romulan episodes, but that is a really great kind of battle strategy episode, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff in Star Trek with two combatants that are never on screen together, just like with Wrath of Khan. I threw in the Squire of Gothos because you're going to see some Q episodes later on, and the Squire of Gothos, Trelane, is kind of the original omnipotent, godlike imp kind of character that messes with our captain and our crew before you get to the very famous Q character in The Next Generation. And it's also just a lot of fun, and I wanted to get a couple of comedic episodes in here. Space Seed is the Khan episode of the original series. I think you kind of want to see that before you see Wrath of Khan, and Wrath of Khan being a classic, brilliant, one of my favorite science fiction movies, much less Star Trek things. is of course on this list too. So definitely watch Space Seed. That's also a really good kind of battle strategy. Tete-a-tete with two combatants that are both trying to match wits with each other. Space Seed also gives you a good sense of where we started in a dark period before we could get to the nigh utopia that we get to in later, like into Star Trek when Starfleet and the Federation form. And I thought it was important to include some episodes that give you a sense of that darker history, of the fact that we had to get to our lowest point before we could start to find that sense of peace and enlightenment and get our priorities straight as a species. Journey to Babel is here mostly for the sake of Vulcan lore. So I wanted to make sure that you got some Romulan stuff, some Vulcan stuff, and some Klingon stuff. And oddly, I think there's more Vulcan and Romulan here than Klingon, but I made sure to get some of that stuff there as well. And that introduces you to Spock's father, Sarek, who we'll also see later on. And that's another good kind of moral quandary episode, and is also all about duty, this time to between your family and your career, your crew, your friends. Mirror Mirror is, I think, the best episode of the original series. You want to make sure and watch a couple of episodes before that, so you get a sense of your characters before you see doppelgangers of them. But Mirror Mirror is the original science fiction alternate universe episode where we go meet the evil versions of ourselves. And as much fun as it is, it's also pretty dark for that show. And for better or worse, we have not been able to get away from Mirror Universe since that. Discovery is obsessed with it. And Discovery latches onto to that and Section 31 really hard. It's like, let's take the darkest stuff from Star Trek and make kind of a whole show about it. This is sort of where all of that starts, and it works great here because of the contrast between how peaceful and relatively I keep saying enlightened. I don't know if I love that word, but like how relatively altruistic we are versus what we could have been if we decided to be tyrants instead. So if you love like evil Superman stories, check out Mirror Mirror. It has one of the best endings of a Star Trek episode with the way Mirror Spock is handled with that. Trouble with Tribbles is a beloved comedic episode, and it happens to be a Klingon episode. It's a lot of fun in a vacuum. You could watch that and not watch anything else in TOS and probably have a good time with it. And then I threw in a third season episode because third season is maligned a lot because they had a lot less money and it's thought of as just kind of a freak of the week season, but it has a couple of really great episodes, and the Tholian Web is one of them. So I tossed that in there as well. And that's kind of a fun, somewhat creepy for the original series, just because the premise is like Kirk disappears and gets phased and seems kind of ghost-like, and you get this really cool species that slowly wraps a web of like an energy web around the ship. I wanted to make sure and get in just a really fun kind of space episode, and that's a good one of those. So then after that, the original series movies, I just put in what's thought of as the trilogy. So starting with Wrath of Khan and then Search for Spock and Voyage Home. I imagine some of you guys that have never watched very much Star Trek have probably seen at least one of these, at least Wrath of Khan or Voyage Home. I won't speak too much to these, except to say that it works really well as a film series, and if you like those, do check out Undiscovered Country at some point, because that is really important for however we feel about how that story is handled. My wife doesn't like that movie, and I've soured on it a little bit over time, but I still overall like it pretty well. It's pretty important connective tissue between the original series and the Next Generation, particularly with the Klingons. So maybe after you've seen some TNG, backtrack to Undiscovered Country, but I didn't put that on the list. I just put Wrath of Khan through Voyage Home, and there's a lot of variety in that trilogy of drama to humor and of just different kinds of science fiction stories. Then we get into The Next Generation. I start with The Measure of a Man here, which is in the second season, and I'm not suggesting that you start with the pilot of most of these shows, because Star Trek just doesn't have a great track record for pilots. Well, I say most, okay, like half of these I didn't put the pilot in. Like I said, the original series, I wouldn't start with either pilot. It had two, and Where No Man Has Gone Before is excellent, but it's not... We're still finding our footing, and it's not real indicative of what that show is going to be moving forward, both tonally and what it looks like. It still has a little bit of the drab look from the original pilot. Anyway, so with The Next Generation, I'm starting with Measure of a Man, which is actually not one of my favorite episodes, but it is beloved among the fan base. It is a data episode, and I didn't put in enough data stuff. That's part of the reason that I put that here. But if anything, like, thought-provoking, idea-wise, what makes a man a man? I mean, it's in the title. That kind of idea is going to grab you with anything. Like, if that's going to be the thing that makes you love TNG, like it does for a lot of people, that's an excellent place to start. It is a really well-written episode. I love Melinda Snodgrass. And I have interviewed her here on the channel a couple of times. She did a Captain Logan show with me, and we talked for like 2.5 hours. But that is not the name drop, but I love her. She's a wonderful writer. I wish she had been able to stick around on that show. But that is a very kind of foundational episode for that series. I should try to run through these a little bit quicker. Q Who is our introduction to the Borg, and is a good place to start with Q. He's already been in a couple of episodes before that, but he is, again, our recurring godlike imp character played by John Delancey, and is a lot of people's favorite villain in Star Trek, if not favorite character. It's a really important, kind of lore episode, not to be confused with the character lore if you know your TNG, but it sets up, a ton of stuff that we do after that, and it's a really engaging episode that also, like Deep Space Nine will do a lot later, really challenges the idea that we have, by the Star Trek future, by the 24th century, come as far as we think we have. Should we really be out here? Do we have too much hubris? Are we too Earth-centered? Are we playing God just by thinking that we should go out there and, muck around with the universe? And Q has a real point with that, I think, but the way he goes about it has massive repercussions for the rest of the series, and the rest of Star Trek as a whole after that. Sins of the Father is the first really major Klingon mythology episode, Klingon lore episode, that will also have ramifications for the character of Worf all the way through TNG and beyond. Worf will become a regular character in Deep Space Nine by Season 4, and we'll continue what we've been doing with him even through that. And I don't want to reveal what exactly happens there. It's a wonderful status quo shift for him by the end of that episode, and I think the big thing that had to happen for him to become really three-dimensional and complex and nuanced as a character. I threw in Sarek, also, which is from Season 3, and because again, I wanted some episodes that gave you a sense of how these shows talk to each other, and that we'll call back to things and bring things back from other shows and from a long time ago. It is a wonderful character episode, not just for Spock's father, Sarek, who you will have already seen if you just watched my list twice by now, twice or three times. I think just twice. No, is he in Search for Spock? I think he is in Search for Spock. Anyway, you'll have seen him at least a couple of times. But it's a really good character episode for Picard. I think it's probably in Patrick Stewart's top 3 best performances. And it's very much like is it a good idea to meet your heroes kind of story. The Best of Both Worlds is our return for the Borg, where we really establish what is scary about that species in taking away people's individuality, forcing us all to be the same. And it's kind of a mirror up against the Starfleet philosophy of perfection, of bettering ourselves. The Borg want that too, but they take things from people in order to do that. And so they're a perversion of the Federation ideal. And I think that might be, I never really thought about this until I just broke that down. That might be one of the reasons that it ends up being a good first episode to show people, because I have shown folks other episodes before that where they just can't really penetrate Star Trek. They don't understand what the big deal is about it. It doesn't speak to them. And Best of Both Worlds is that episode that tends to finally speak to people. If you watch a couple of episodes, like you're going through my list in order, and you're like, I mean, this is fine, but it's just not grabbing me. I don't get what all the fuss is about. Maybe you too will have like a light bulb thing when you watch The Best of Both Worlds. A wonderful character piece for Riker in particular, who has to fill Captain Picard's shoes when something horrible happens to him. Okay, moving right along. My absolute favorite episode of The Next Generation, I went and put here because it's a fun, in some ways comedy episode, but also a really thought-provoking ethical conundrum thing, is A Matter of Time. It's a really good one-off standalone thing with one of my favorite singular, although I wish he'd come back, appearance characters in a guy named Berlinghoff Rasmussen, who is from another time period and suddenly shows up on the ship to observe, and Picard has to wrestle with the advantage that might give him in dealing with a crisis on a planet, and whether he should whether he's morally obligated to take that advantage or not. And it has my favorite Picard speech in all of TNG. The Wounded, I also put in here because it'll give you a sense of continuity moving from The Next Generation to Deep Space Nine. So The Wounded is the episode that first introduces the Cardassians, who are one of the major bad guy races in Deep Space Nine, or I should just say major races, because DS9 is mature and thoughtful enough not to just make every character of a villain race evil. And some of the best characters in that show are indeed Cardassians. But it establishes Chief O'Brien's relationship with the Cardassians, and then he's going to be one of the main characters in Deep Space Nine. So I wanted to tack that in there too. If you are curious about Deep Space Nine and you're thinking maybe just watching that show, I would suggest maybe watching The Wounded first and then going to Deep Space Nine. And my wife suggested I throw in Timescape, because you gotta have one of the weird, kind of trippy, messing around with time episodes, or just trippy, odd episodes in general. I think that's a Brandon Braga script. I can't remember, but he writes a lot of the weirdest episodes of TNG, and we gotta get one of those in there. That's real late too. That is season 6 or 7, and it's a, I didn't put a lot of the big kind of like weird sci-fi situation episodes on here. I tried to get one for each series if I could, but you've got so I threw in Mirror Mirror, and I guess with original series, and I guess you have that with Only a Web a little bit as well. But this is one of those like crazy high concept episodes where Picard and some of his crew on they're on a shuttlecraft. They're coming back from a conference, and the Enterprise seems to be frozen in space and is being shot at by a Romulan ship, and they have to figure out why everything seems frozen. And that also gives us a Romulan episode. And somehow I ended up getting Romulans in every single season, which will probably make you think that they're even more important than they are, but that's how this ended up working out. The only TNG movie I put on this list is First Contact, because that for two reasons. It's the big Borg movie, and we've been dealing with the Borg a little bit with the episodes that I threw in with TNG, so you'll know what you're looking at when you finally go back to First Contact, if maybe you've seen it before. It was very, very popular in 96 when it came out, so there's a good chance that that's one of the Star Trek movies that you have seen. It's a great-looking movie. There are some plot points in it that don't make, a ton of sense, but it's super entertaining, and I wanted to get some, cool action stuff in here too, to give you the sense that Star Trek is not just about people sitting around talking. There also is, some fun, like, sci-fi action that happens with it as well, but it also is a story that gives you a sense of where we came from to get to the more utopian-like future. I didn't put in Zephram Cochrane's first episode, who is a character that we meet in that movie from the past, but he originally comes from the original series. I didn't think that was necessary. It might be kind of confusing because he feels a little retcon. He feels like a very different character, but just know that, just like with Wrath of Khan, that is in a way kind of a sequel or prequel, however you want to look at it, to a original series episode. Then we get to Deep Space Nine, which is a weird series to just watch a smattering of episodes in, but I think it can be done, certainly, and I tried not to put in anything that would give too much away as far as huge major plot points, big revelations or twists in that series, of which there are many. So that is a show that I think you do need to start with the pilot for. And then just decide if you want to keep watching it, and just know that the first season is going to feel a lot more like TNG, like The Next Generation, on a space station, and it won't be until the second season that we start to really get arcy and get into bigger stories that go through lots of episodes, and we start doing a lot of that by 4 and 5. But Emissary, I think you need because you need to see who these characters are when they start, because they change so much in a way that characters in other shows aren't really allowed to do. And it is the best pilot of the 5 series before you get to New Track. Duet, Adam suggested I put here. I had him look at this list too, and I think he's right about that. That is the second to last episode, I think, of the first season, and gives you a much better understanding of the conflict, the turmoil between the Cardassians and the Bajorans, which is the foundation for that whole series. The other reason you need Emissary, you need the pilot, is because you will probably inevitably, even with just the episodes I put here, hear the word emissary come up. Sisko is a religious figure in the Bajoran, in Bajoran society, in the Bajoran faith, and you need to see the pilot and understand how in the world that even happens. Civil Defense is here because it'll give you a good sense of the Cardassian government and justice system and how that works, and it's a really killer character episode for O'Brien. I put Past Tense here for a couple of reasons. That is a two-parter, and of course Emissary is going to be a 2-hour episode. Most of these have 2-hour pilots. Past Tense is another, where is that bottom place that our society has to get to before we can start to really better ourselves and become better as a species. And it takes place in 2024. It takes place this year. It's a really solid time travel episode. It's one of the darker things that happens in earlier Deep Space Nine, and it is it's just really intelligent about dealing with overpopulation and the potential downfall of the sort of society that we live in now. And then you have my favorite episode of that show. I didn't do my favorite for all of these, but a lot of my favorite episodes tend to be standalone and really easy to watch in a vacuum. In its way, it's also a time travel thing. It's called The Visitor, and it is Tony Todd's best performance in Star Trek. In my mind, he plays a number of characters, and he plays an older Jake Sisko. Jake Sisko is Sisko's kid, who is trying to save his father, who keeps showing up to him through a weird time vortex thing at various points in his life. And it's about, a lot of character pieces in Star Trek are about duty in some way. And in this case, it's duty to yourself and living your best life versus to your family, to your father. I choke up every time I see it. It's wonderful. And I think that can easily be watched in a vacuum. I put in Trials and Tribulations because Trouble with Tribbles is here. It also gives you a good contrast of how dark that show can get versus how comedic and goofy it can get. And also some of the technical innovations that happen with some Star Trek episodes. It does some compositing stuff that had never really been done on television before, in taking some of the Deep Space Nine crew and integrating them into an original series episode. It's really impressively done, and is a lot of fun. Could have been awful, but it's not. Empok Nor is one of my wife's absolute favorite episodes. It is a kind of, it's really dark too, and is kind of a horror episode where her favorite character in the show, Garrick, who is a really mysterious Cardassian who lives on the space station from the beginning, kind of loses his mind and runs around and tries to kill everybody. And it's a really fun, horror kind of episode. And then another great Garrick episode, the last thing here, is In the Pale Moonlight, which is it 6 or 7? It's real late. I think it's 7. One of, if not the best episodes of the entire show. And I threw that in there because I think it's good to know where all of that is going if you want to, delve into Deep Space Nine to get a sense of the Dominion War, and that we're going to get into a status quo where it's a big war. But it's a really good standalone episode too. It doesn't tell you too much, and it is the most morally ambiguous thing in a Star Trek episode, at least for a Starfleet character. Okay, it's maybe tied with another thing that happens with Sisko earlier, but anyway, without it feeling just entirely cynical. It's like, how far do you have to go? How much of like the wrong thing do you have to do in order to make the right thing happen in a really extreme situation like war? And also is about Romulans. Then we get into Voyager. I start with also a Romulan episode, Eye of the Needle, which is real early. It's in the first season, where Voyager, remember, they're lost in the Delta Quadrant. They make contact with somebody in the Alpha Quadrant through a micro wormhole, which they can't go through, but they can talk to someone, and it has a really cool kind of twist ending. I put that there mostly to just kind of establish characters in early status quo and situation with that show before you get to my second choice. These are all chronological, because it would be really weird to start with the first Q episode in Voyager, which is Death Wish, but also an episode that I think stands alone great and gives you a really great sense between the couple of Q things I have here of the different sides of Q. And it's another wonderful moral conundrum episode. It's all about assisted suicide. Scorpion is kind of Voyager's answer to The Best of Both Worlds. It's the introduction initially to 7 of 9. I feel like you kind of need to see that happen maybe before you watch some of the later episodes that include 7 of 9. And it's one of the most exciting, engaging, relatively cinematic episodes of Star Trek. It's definitely in my top 5 for Voyager. Scientific Method is an episode that Sarah suggested I put here. It's another great, I want to say moral conundrum thing, but it's kind of putting like humanity in perspective with other cultures that might see themselves as better than us or superior to us, kind of godlike. and it's kind of the closest to a weird, messed up, trippy episode that I put here. There's way weirder ones, but I'm with her. I think that's a cool one-off episode to throw in there. And then Bride of Chaotica is a comedic episode. It's also a holodeck episode. I didn't really put any of those from The Next Generation, but that's a kind of recurring thing where we'll go into the holodeck and create holographic worlds, and sometimes they try to kill us. That's a trope that we use way too much, but some of those are really fun. And Bride of Chaotica goes back to like a 1930s sci-fi serial, and a lot of it is in black and white, and it's a ton of fun. Also watches okay by in a vacuum, I think. And I also put Think Tank here as a nice one-off episode with a villain that comes after you with his mind rather than with muscle, and guest star there is Jason Alexander, who does an excellent job. Another thing that just kind of stands alone great. I didn't put some of the very, very best Voyager episodes here because I think there's maybe other things you'd want to see before you looked at them, and I didn't want to do too much 7 of 9 stuff. But anyway, so a lot of kind of good standalone one-off episodes, both funny and serious, and just weird sci-fi stuff with Voyager. And then I did go ahead and put some Enterprise episodes here. Again, I include Enterprise as entirely, what's the word I'm looking for? Optional, voluntary, but that's another show I think you probably want to watch the pilot for first, to just introduce yourself to the status quo versus the rest of Star Trek and those characters. So start with Broken Bow, and also its pilot is one of its best episodes. And then the Andorian incident from the first season, the Andorian stuff is great all the way through there. You will have met that species once with one of the original series episodes that I showed you, Journey to Babel. And then we get Minefield, which is in the second season and is also a Romulan episode, but we don't actually see them on screen yet because, according to the original series, we don't know what they look like until an original series episode, which is on this list. You will see that. But I put in, this is the one place where I put in 2 episodes that actually happen back to back, but are not technically a two-parter, because I think they're both just really indicative of the things that do really work well in Enterprise. So I put in Minefield, and then the next episode, Dead Stop, which is another just really cool sci-fi premise. The Enterprise, so Minefield is, we come into a Romulan minefield, and our ship gets messed up. And then Dead Stop is, we got to repair our ship somehow. We're too far away from anything Starfleet. What are we going to do? And we come upon this space station, this repair station that is completely automated, and it seems too good to be true. What is the catch with it? And like I said, just really cool sci-fi premise. And then finally, First Flight, which is a really great flashback episode. And we don't do a ton of that in, at least, prior to New Trek in Star Trek. And it's kind of odd that one of its best episodes is a flashback thing, but it's about Archer before he gets the Enterprise trying to break a warp record. And it's a really good character piece. I didn't put anything past season 2 because it gets so arcy. I could have tacked in a Mirror Darkly, I guess, which is kind of a beloved episode from Enterprise. It's real late in season 4, just before the show gets canceled, and is a 2-part episode that takes place in the Mirror Universe. But I feel like you might want to be more familiar with the show and see some of the 3rd season Xindi War stuff before you go and look at that. So if you do find yourself kind of digging on Enterprise, but you think it's too slow, maybe go start at the beginning of season 3 and watch the Xindi War, which is much more serialized and kind of one big story, and feels more like kind of a Deep Space Nine thing. So there's my primer. There's all the episodes that I suggest in order, and let's see what other folks are saying in the comments. There is Brandon. Good to see you, Brandon. Thanks for being here. And like I said earlier, I'm hoping that he and Adam and I can do some Deep Space Nine with Star Trek Club later this year. I sent him a message about that earlier, and I hadn't heard back from him yet. So this might be the first he's hearing about that too. But he's been begging me to bring that back, so hopefully he's able to make it with us for that. Apostolic Nerd, the Borg seriously scared me so much as a child. Such great villains. Yeah, just that. It's a really heady kind of concept when you're a kid, and what's freakish about it isn't even what they look like as much as, and I mean, they're scary looking, especially when we get to First Contact, but just so much as the idea of losing your individuality, losing your freedom, losing who you are, and the fact that they kind of make an argument for it. Not that I would want to be Borg, but the things they're able to accomplish by forcing all these people and technology into their collective is kind of chilling and screwed up. And like I said, is the kind of opposite of the Federation ideal. And he also says, me and my wife are currently watching through DS9 and are in the second season. I'm excited for it to get to the good stuff, as I've heard a lot of good things about the series. Yeah, again, it's a little slow going, and there's a lot of great stuff in second season. So you're right around like the Circle and that stuff, and then you're going to get into the Maquis and all those things. I introduced my wife to DS9 with season 6. We just watched through the Dominion War because at the time that we started dating, Star Trek was very expensive as it was first coming out on DVD, and I got a really good deal on just the 6th and the 7th seasons, and I had just been getting her into Trek, and she was falling in love with TNG, and she really wanted to watch it, and I was like, well, you missed the first 5 seasons, but I think 6 is an okay starting point. Just to explain a couple of things about stuff that happened before that, and I think she ended up liking Deep Space Nine probably even more because she watched those seasons and then went back. And so it was easier to get through the slow stuff because she knew how great it was going to get. So I'm not even suggesting necessarily that you do that. But part of what I wanted to do with the DS9 primer was to give you just a taste of how exciting and, heady and nuanced and thought-provoking that later stuff ends up getting with all the moral ambiguity. Nicholas Bodo, my most anticipated TOS episode is definitely Khan's episode. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Ricardo Montalban is amazing in that, and he's certainly doing a bit of a different thing in Wrath of Khan, but he definitely feels like the same character. He's just been, on a desolate wasteland planet for a long time. Clone Army 66. Hey, guy here with your Star Wars. No, I'm joking. Hey, Cap, great list of episodes. Thanks. Glad to hear you guys are thinking of bringing Star Trek Club back. We've been wanting to for a long time. This seems like a really good excuse for it. And I'm going to be doing this year, because I've got a new baby in the house, probably a lot more of these kind of, less planned, just jumping on and doing discussions or blind commentary kinds of videos. So they'll be later at night like this is, but I think we'll be able to work it in at least once, if not twice a month. Nicholas Bodo, DS9 totally looks like my thing. It will definitely add to Wrath of Khan for me. Those are separate comments. I think he was talking about Space Seed, of course, with that second comment. Yeah, check it out. Again, if you watch the first couple episodes of DS9 and you find yourself kind of bored, maybe jump to that second episode I suggested with Duet, and then maybe even jump all the way to 3, if not 4. I think Worf's edition and just Way of the Warrior at the beginning of season 4, that 2-parter, because it's a killer episode, did bring some people into Deep Space Nine that were sort of bored with it before. The status quo with the Klingons through 4 is really fun and interesting, and retroactively feels inevitable. It's really great that we finally did that. I don't want to give too much away about what happens with that, but we do some great Klingon stuff in DS9, and some fans felt like it was too gimmicky to bring in Worf, and then in hindsight, once you have all of that, it feels like we never did anything like enough with him in TNG, and thank God he ended up becoming a big part of Deep Space Nine. Especially because without him, I don't know that the Klingon lore would have ever gotten to the kind of fever pitch that it does in that, and some of the best Klingon characters, like General Martok, are in that show. Adam March, the dinner scene is Space Seed is top acting from Montalban, Nimoy, and Shatner. It's definitely the best. Pardon me, the best scene in that episode. The verbal warfare is fantastic. That speech Khan has about wordplay is warfare concealed, or like dinner conversations. It's fantastic. Yeah, originally I thought about actually doing a commentary of an episode with you guys tonight, and then I decided, I'm such a windbag, I'll probably go on too long if I also do that. I'm glad I spent a little bit of time breaking down those episodes and talking about why I picked them. Again, particularly for Star Trek fans that might want to use this list. So you'll know kind of why that stuff is there, and maybe just to spark interest. Like, even if you don't want to watch everything that I put there, maybe one of those episodes, just a real brief synopsis I gave you, will make you go, I'm curious. Maybe I'll go check that out. But Space Seed would have been the episode that I would have done if I did a commentary at the end of this. The other reason I decided not to do that is I didn't really want anybody's first time watching Star Trek to be with me rambling through it. Go take a look on your own, whatever you end up starting with. Nicholas Bodo, of course, I plan to watch the very best of TNG. And again, I left some of the very, very best favorite episodes off. I let in tonight with the Inner Light theme. Inner Light is a lot of people's like tip top episode, if not in like the top 3, where Picard lives out like a whole life within a couple of hours, and it's excellent. It's not my favorite episode, but I like it a lot, and I could have thrown that on there too. And if you end up liking Picard and you want a really great character study episode for him, go check that out. But I mean, I guess I would kind of call that a character study. But anyway, but I didn't put it there just because I had enough episodes and I had enough Picard stuff. That's what it is. It has been said that social occasions are warfare concealed. That's the quote. Thanks, Adam March. Adam March knows his Star Trek. But yeah, we are well over an hour. If anybody has a question or anything, feel free to throw it in and I'll answer it. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. I didn't want this to be too horribly long tonight, but wanted to lay out my my guide, my primer, and I would really love to hear later on from folks that try this out, whether you pick just one show and watch those episodes, or whether you watch an episode, kind of fall in love with the show and start watching through it, or especially if you decide to do the whole thing, does it get you interested enough to keep looking at Star Trek in general? Which show, if you do a smattering of each, do you latch on to the most? And if you decide after that to take a look at any new Trek, does any of that grab you either? I would be interested to know that as well. I'm not telling anybody what to do. Like, don't look at new Trek. Completely avoid it. I'm just telling you what my opinion is about that in general overall so far. And that I don't think any of that is certainly a place to start. But if you were to look at anything early, Strange New Worlds over anything. Robert, I hope your new baby and the rest of your family are doing well. They are. Everybody's good. The new baby is just sleeping a lot and eating great, and she's very cute. And she is the most mature looking baby we've had. Like, right out of the womb, I was like, she doesn't even look like a newborn. Super expressive too. Nicholas says the shows I will watch are TOS, TNG, and DS9. Yeah, cool. Give Voyager a shot, maybe. Like I said, it's one of the best shows for standalone one-and-done, high-concept sci-fi episodes. And it's important to note that for better and worse, I'm going to say and worse, Voyager is kind of TNG Season 8. Because it gets made because TNG is over, but the studio still wants something like TNG on, and even though it's got a different premise where they're lost in space and it starts with a mix of two different kinds of crews, it very quickly starts to just feel like TNG, except we're lost out in space. And I would have much preferred that show to live up to the original premise and actually deal with crews of different persuasions butting heads, and deal with the Starfleet and Maquis, and deal more with like not having enough in the way of resources. It should have been a little bit of a darker show. It should have been a more serialized show, certainly. And I don't mean to sound like a hypocrite and say, well, good Star Trek is dark Star Trek, but the premise was not just more TNG, and there's a lot of that feels that way. Having said that, because of that, some of the same guys, like Braga, were writing some of their most fun, like, one-off TNG-esque episodes in Voyager. I also meant to mention the Orville, because famously, as a lot of you guys probably know, the Orville starts as a parody of Star Trek that really kind of just turns into Star Trek. And it's, of course, not set in that universe, but it's the exact same premise. It's very much a mix of, like, TNG and Voyager. Third season gets a little bit more Deep Space Nine-y in how serialized it gets. And if you, especially if you fall in love with TNG, but you want something with a little bit more modern sensibilities and something that is doing like morality plays and social commentary like Star Trek always has done, about more current issues, things that are happening now, do yourself a favor and take a look at that show. And I thought about picking 4 or 5 episodes from the Orville to pitch to, but I think that show just watches pretty well in order, even though it is more episodic at the beginning. I am going to be that, stereotypical new Trek hating Star Trek fan that says the Orville is where it's at for modern Star Trek. I just call it like I see it. I think it really is. Seth MacFarlane really knows his Star Trek. He really understands the ideas, the ideals, the tropes, the motifs. He knows how to work in all of that, while at the same time making fun of it. And then again, eventually, the show kind of forgets it was a parody in the first place, and it gets better because of that. I wouldn't say, like, skip all the comedic stuff in the first season to get to that, because some of it is foundational and really important to understand what's happening in that show, because it is more serialized than a TNG, certainly. But you might find a little bit of the early stuff kind of a slog, particularly if you don't find it super funny. But if you really know your Star Trek, I think a lot of it is pretty funny. But after just a few TOSs and TNGs, you'd probably understand at least some of the in-jokes with that. And it works better than some of the comedy in New Trek and with Lower Decks and stuff, because it's not the memorabilis of... You remember this specific moment in this specific episode. It's, you remember this dumb thing that we're always doing in Star Trek for no good reason? Yeah, what do we do with that? That's kind of the more of the comedy with that show. But I'm watching back through that right now, and I don't know. I had a lot of respect for the way Seth MacFarlane handled that, and I will also say that even though it might be over, because we don't know if they'll ever come back and make another season now, if you decide to watch The Orville, just know that it gets a pretty solid last episode, where it easily could come back and do a 4th season, but it knows it might be done, and I think it's a great conclusion if it ends up being the last episode. It feels like everything you want resolved is resolved. Brandon is mentioning that we still haven't done the Beyond commentary. Yeah, we still got to get to that. It's been years since we did the last one, and when we started Star Trek Club, we put it on the wheel, because we were spinning a wheel to watch episodes, which we won't do when we bring that back, at least for now, because I want to get through Dominion War, and Brandon's never seen it. We've never seen all of Dominion War anyway, so that's part of why I wanted to do that, but we kept expecting Beyond to show up on the wheel, and it never did, so we've never done that. So maybe we'll try to get that knocked out this year, too. It might be smart to start with it. I'll talk to Brandon and Adam about that. I'm just planning on stream again. which I tend to do. Apocalyptic Nerd, as far as New Trek goes, I was surprised how much I enjoy Lower Decks. I hear that from people all the time. He says it starts off in the shadows of Rick and Morty, but eventually grows into its own thing and is at its best when it's just being Star Trek, which is very parallel to the Orville, where it's almost forcing its comedy too much at the beginning to not get sued, it feels like, and then it just kind of becomes Star Trek. I've heard that about Lower Decks. I have had a tough time getting excited about looking at any more of it. I've never been able to get through a whole episode of that. I just don't think it's funny, and I feel like it's a show, at least early on, because I mean, like, you're not the first person I've heard say that, and maybe with that I will just jump to like a second season episode randomly and see how they're telling stories at that point. I also just don't like that it's canonical, or that it's supposed to be a canonical. It's so cartoony, I have a really hard time with that. But like, if the stories are good, if it comes to actually like know how to tell a Star Trek story, then I certainly can live with that. I don't mean to be a continuity hound or anything. It just takes me out. It just makes it hard to appreciate the internal logic of the thing. But the few episodes that and again, I've never been able to get all the way through one, that I attempted to watch early on felt like just kind of bad fan fiction. Whereas like, here's a show made by people that clearly love Star Trek. They adore it. They have a lot of affinity for it, but they don't really get like what it's about, or how those stories work, or why it's good when it's good. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of mediocre and bad Star Trek. And it may be that they find their footing, and like people have said, and that is not the case later, but that's how I felt about it initially anyway. Butts of Sim, well, some jerk went and voted all the pilots onto the wheel. Me. Yeah, thanks, Butts of Sim. Really appreciate that. Well, guys, that's going to be it for me tonight. Hope you enjoyed this show. I've been kicking this list around for the last week and finally got it solidified. Glad I was able to sit down and make this. And again, leave a comment down the road. Let me know, like, if you're new to Star Trek, and let me know what you did with the list, if anything. And if you are a Star Trek person, feel free to list some other episodes that you think might be good starting places or good early episodes for folks to watch. Let me know what you thought of the list I put together. Certainly not at all the only way to do it. It's a way to do it, and I hope it works out well. But as an experiment, I'm hoping that some folks come in and tell me how it worked out. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it, man. I'm going to get going now, but I will see you with more streams very, very soon. And good night, everybody. I was Captain Logan, and appreciate you hanging out with me. Bye, folks.